Welcome to Uncomfortable Growth Uncut, where we celebrate those who defy fear, embrace growth, and live without regret. In this episode, we peel back the layers to reveal the person behind the profile with Imogen Hewitt. As she recounts her story, Imogen illuminates the pivotal moments of her life that shaped her into the impressive leader she is today. From the daunting decision to move her family to Singapore to start a new agency with no clients or staff, to the realization that growth and comfort cannot coexist. Imogen's insights are a beacon for anyone standing at the crossroads of opportunity. Join us for a conversation that's as much about the power of asking for help as it is about finding strength in vulnerability. So welcome, Imogen. How are you going today?
Good. I'm already quite aware of the fact that with that kind of introduction, there's quite a lot to live up to. So I'm going to do my very best. The person behind the profile is mildly nervous by the scale of love that went into that intro. So thank you, of course. It's greatly flattering. But yeah, let's crack into
it. Absolutely. So what I love doing on this program is having people share their own uncomfortable growth stories. And I always talk about uncomfortable growth as being that tension point between what I want to do, but I'm not sure if I can. You know, and that's where the uncomfortable comes in, but it's also at that point of opportunity and possibility, which leads to growth. Not always easy things, often quite difficult things, but I love hearing kind of the full spectrum of the experience and what you've learned through your own life. So I'm just going to throw to you and, ask you to share your story, and it'll just be like having a chat along the way. So why don't you get us started?
All right. So I love that definition for starters, because I think that there is something incredibly true about that moment where you're kind of considering, I feel like I should do this, but I don't know if I can do this. I feel like the outcome of taking this leap of faith is probably going to be enormously powerful, but very uncomfortable, whilst I kind of navigate the gap between what I know I can do and what I hope I can do. Or what is expected of me. And I have lots and lots of examples of that, but a particularly good one is probably a conversation that I had, it was quite a while ago now, but it was around about, let's say, 2010, and I was in a successful position in an agency, and I was loving that agency and thriving. I had come back after parental leave, and I had asked to do some work in an area that I'd never worked in before, and it was quite deliberate about building some diverse skills. But I had kind of come to the point where I was rather precocious. That may come through in our conversation.
How old were you? How old were you roughly around teen, Imogen?
Oh gosh, 32, 33, maybe something like that. Everybody can do the maths now, so oh well.
I always come out and just tell people I'm 51, everyone, so it's okay.
47, 48 shortly. So yeah, I was kind of at that juncture where I was like, look, that's been fun for a time, but I kind of want to do something else. And I had and I still have a kind of bravado that allows me to ask questions that if I really stopped and thought about them too long, I'd probably convince myself not to. So in that instance, it was a good idea not to decode it too much. But I said to my boss at the time, I kind of want to know what's next. I'm getting a little bit itchy feet. I kind of reckon there's something else in me. What can you do with me? And he said, do you want to move to Singapore and start an agency? And you don't have any clients or an office or any staff, and I kind of need you to answer the question in 24 hours. And I said, well, that's not exactly where I thought this chat was going to go, but give me a bit and I'll have a think about that one. And then, to throw a little bit more weirdness and wildness into the story, I had an 18-month-old baby and a husband and, a mortgage, and we're relatively settled and all of those sorts of things. And so I went home that night and I said to my husband, Martin, do you want to move to Singapore? And you'll need to quit your job for a time so that you can look after Eden. And I'm going to try and start a branch of this agency that I'm working for. It was Naked Communications. And I've never really been to that market, but what do you reckon? And he said to me, we should do it. And he didn't even think about it. And I said, but what if it's a total disaster? And he said, if it's a total disaster, we'll just move home. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Because what it did for me was kind of take the pressure off my shoulders of being right or wrong. And I think often in these sorts of really big decisions, you're worried that you're going to make the wrong choice.
Yeah.
But I've come to the realization over time that there really isn't a wrong choice. You do it or you don't do it. And if you do it, you'll have a set of experiences you wouldn't have otherwise had. In this particular instance, I learned a depth of resilience and resourcefulness that I didn't know that I had in me. I learned that if I have to knock on doors and cold call people and borrow work from other markets around the world to open a conversation, then I'm absolutely capable of doing that. I learned that asking for help when you don't know what to do is a good thing. It's not a weakness. And I got, so we went, obviously, drum roll, we did go. And I spent sort of, 4 or 5 years doing things that I would never have otherwise had the opportunity to do, and finding skills like incredible persuasiveness and real ability to have a much broader and better understanding about cultural diversity and what working with different types of people in different types of contexts could do for me. I learned very quickly that managing a business and being responsible for paying people's salaries is both very rewarding but also pretty scary when you're not quite sure what's going to happen from, in the early days of that business, we weren't really sure what was going to happen from one day to the next, let alone, month to month. And then I also learned that there is so much power in positivity and the momentum that naturally creates.
Yeah.
Because I spent a lot of time talking to people about how crazy it was that I was trying to do this. And I found that people's generosity of spirit, they couldn't help but be offering help.
Yeah.
So even competitive agencies, I'd be like, can I talk to you about how things work in Singapore? And they were like, so you're opening an agency that's going to compete with me, but you want to come over and have a coffee and you want me to tell you how it works? And I'm like, yeah, if you would. And more often than not,
brilliant.
people just say, well, that is a very brave question and it deserves some of my time. I want to meet this crazy woman who is prepared to even ask for my help in that context. And then, you build relationships, you build kind of a network pretty quickly. You get a bunch of people that will advocate for you, even when you're essentially a competitor, just because they respect the kind of bravery and the, I guess the pure. Nobody asked that question, so I can't believe you did. So I'm going to give you some payback for that.
The pure guts of it. So, wow, you have highlighted so many different aspects. And so what I really want to do is unpick it a little bit, if that's okay with you. So you started with the conversation saying you had some itchy feet, and then suddenly there was this completely out of the box, curveball left field idea about why don't you go to Singapore and start a new agency and, move with your family and your very young daughter. How did you feel? If you can just kind of walk us through that moment and kind of how did that unfold for you? Because you really had such a short time frame.
That conversation, I recall it very clearly. I was in the back of a taxi with my then boss going from a client meeting back to the office. And I remember thinking, this business I work for is completely bonkers. Who says that when you say, what's my next job opportunity look like? Well, it looks like you change countries and take everyone with you and build a whole empire in another time and place. So I remember thinking, that's not what I was expecting them to say. Then I remember very quickly feeling like the rush of kind of, the heartbeat and the sense of anxiety that comes around. I'm not really sure if I should have asked for that. Now what am I going to do? And then I remember him saying to me, you know, whether you do it or not, it'll be the making of you.
Wow.
And thinking, you know, my dad had died not too long before that, probably
Mm,
2 years. Yeah, about 2 years, because my daughter was born not too long after that. And I remember just thinking, if you don't, you won't know, and
mm,
you'll resent not knowing. And if
mm,
you do, it could be a disaster, but it's just a choice. And if that choice is wrong, then you make a different choice. And that's probably
mm,
not the end of the world. And some of that, I think, came from, you know, my dad's experience as a, you know, he didn't finish school, but he moved to Australia when he was in his 20s. He put himself through TAFE. He opened his own business. He, you know, had a reasonably successful hydraulic engineering business, which is a strange thing for a 14-year-old who never finished school to finally, you know, end up in. And I think that sense of he was quite limitless
mm.
because he didn't have the structures that told you that you couldn't.
Yep. And
And
it's
so
so
I just
it's
kind of adopted some of that, I think.
yeah, and I love that reference because I think so often we create the frames that we get stuck in.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
you know, I love the fact that, you know, you were obviously exposed to your dad growing up and he didn't have limits on himself. You know, even though he hadn't, you know, probably ticked what most people would see as all the boxes, that didn't stop him.
No.
And
And this might be slightly off the topic, but what he did do was understand and invest in relationships with people.
mm,
So yes, he didn't have the structure to say I need to have done these 5 things before I do the following 5 things.
mm-hmm,
Um, but he did have an incredible ability to create generosity, to deliver generosity, to be invested in understanding why people do the weird things that they do, to have personal relationships with everyone from, you know, the checkout chick at Woolies um, to whoever his, you know, most significant clients were. And I just think that if you are really connected to people and you have the ability to trust in them, then you are free of a bunch of other constraints, because I think people are good.
mm,
And if you are surrounded by people then you think that they are good, then you have a much more optimistic view on what's possible, I think.
yeah. And I love also, like I love that story, because you saw the goodness in people. And just even by building relationships and asking, you also gave great examples of how you were really bold and just asked your competitors in Singapore, like, how do I do this?
Well, the worst
Um,
thing that someone can do in that context is say no, and people
yeah.
don't, because they're surprised, they're surprised by your boldness. But there's also something quite, if I do say so myself, charismatic about being a person that doesn't necessarily follow those unwritten rules. Like we're competitors, we
Yeah.
don't help one another. Is who says?
Yeah. 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 And like what you were saying too, it's about relationships. Like, you know, they're good people. And
Yeah,
you probably cross paths with them in the industry. You probably know some of them, maybe some you don't, but you know people in common because
yeah,
industries are small places.
exactly
And
right.
relationships, I absolutely believe transcends everything else. So whether it's, you know, you're in different companies or different departments, or you go for a different football team, or whatever is the thing that makes you different,
Yep.
um, humanity or being a good person transcends that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, you know, again, it's a really micro example as opposed to the macro kind of let's move countries story. But
Mm,
I really believe if your gut is saying this is going to be a really difficult conversation, you should probably have it straight away.
mm,
And it's a micro example of uncomfortable growth. So in the kind of work
mm,
that I do, if something goes wrong, or I think something is going wrong, or I think there's a niggle somewhere, and I'm like, oh,
mm,
I don't really want to have that conversation with the client, or I don't really want to have that what could be a confrontational conversation with one of the people that works for us.
mm,
I know over time I have learnt my lesson that you have that conversation straight away and you do it with as much humanity as you can possibly muster.
mm,
Um, and not everybody does, but what it builds is trust and psychological safety and a shared belief system. And even if you're wrong, so I've been wrong on a few occasions where I've gone, I think I might have upset you by doing this, this, this. And the person on the receiving end of that conversation has said, I don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about. That didn't happen. And I've gone, I would prefer to have a conversation where I feel really silly about bringing that up and I was wrong than I've not had a conversation where there's something unresolved between us, which we could have sorted out just by having a conversation that some people call difficult and I just call truthful and necessary.
Yeah.
So yeah, big examples, small examples.
But I think that's so important because, like you said, you've learned over time that it's better to have those conversations sooner rather than letting them just, I don't know, percolate, and whether it's in your head only, like the example you gave, or whether it's something that they're concerned about. If it's unspoken, we make up the story in our head, and that story is often so untrue, and it creates
and it's always worse than the truth because it's human
always
nature.
Worse. It is.
If we leave human beings in a vacuum, then they make up the bits that they don't know.
Yeah.
And those bits are always worse than what the reality was. And I guess the other thing is if you don't have those conversations, then the conversation becomes worse. Because then you're trying to explain why you didn't have it 3 weeks ago or a month ago or last year.
Yeah. Oh, and probably maybe something else incidental has happened and that amplifies the story, or, because there's no interaction to say, hold on, what's our shared story? There's only the story in my head or the story in your head.
Yeah, and we've both been ruminating on it separately for 12 months. So it's become completely unhinged at that point and probably bears no resemblance to the challenge that you faced a year ago, which was quite minor. But I think that those, that is true of professional relationships, but it's also true of personal relationships. I was talking to my eldest, who's nearly 15, yesterday, and she was saying, we were just having a conversation about, oh, this person upset me and blah, 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 blah. And I said, are you going to go back and have that chat? And she's had no choice but to be around me and the fact that I will have those conversations and I will have them pretty much immediately. And she was like, yes, of course I am. I'm just going to let everyone simmer down for a bit. And I was like, that's a human being that I hope will be able to model what a healthy but uncomfortable conversation looks like. And that has great implications for the world. I know that sounds a bit grandiose, but if we had lots of small people, she's not actually very small, she's considerably taller than me, but that's a whole different story. If we had lots of younger people who were primed to tackle the big challenges that they face in constructive ways, then they would be free to be solving the problems that we've created in the world. Rather than being stuck in their own little bubble of self-doubt and, you're growing and you're working out what kind of human I am and does that person hate me forever and all of that nonsense that goes with being, a 15-year-old girl. If you could help, you can't eradicate it completely, but if you could remove some of those internal dialogue pressures, or is it internal monologue pressures, whatever, then imagine what that energy could be better put towards. And that's true in business too.
I totally agree with you, because I think too, there's the personal side, or what I feel or what they may be thinking, but then there's also the business side, right? Which is, what do we need to achieve, or what are we trying to do as a team? And so often the personal stuff isn't overtly discussed, so it plays out through the work.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And that's when kind of people can sense and know that there's something more than the work happening. But no one's talking about the real issue. They're actually letting it play out through the work. And that's really politics, right? When people know something else is happening. But officially it's all very polite and proper and stage within the work, but it's actually not about the work, it's about the relationships. And I also, when I see the amount of time and energy that is, I think, wasted time and energy, so much of it comes from that. Just if people were just able to lean into those uncomfortable conversations, but suddenly address the elephant in the room, the
Yeah, I
unspoken.
could barely agree with you more. I think if your spider senses are activated, even if
Mhm.
you don't know what it is, then call someone and say, my spider senses are activated. We have some problem and I'm not
Mhm.
really sure what it is, but I get the vibe. The
Yeah.
vibe is there is something else at play. And
Yeah.
if I'm wrong, that's cool. Just tell me I'm wrong. But if I'm right, can we please talk about it? Because it's kind of weirding me out. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to be like a psychologist. You don't have to have the perfect methodology for these
No.
conversations. You have to have um, a personal value around honesty
Yeah.
and I guess a little bit of wisdom that even if you approach it in the wrong way, your intent will shine through.
Mhm.
And then a little bit of just guts to just go there,
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah. So much of your uncomfortable growth story too is around guts. I like the word guts because it kind of sounds like it is, right? It's
Yeah,
guts,
what it says on the tin.
Yeah, you just did it. And and it's a huge move. And fortunately, obviously, Martin just was like, let's do it. If it doesn't work out, that's fine. But there would
Yeah,
have been lots of moments along the way, right? Because moving is a job and a half in itself, right? And we
yeah,
both know that, having moved
yeah,
internationally before. And then when you get there and you land, and then finding a place or getting settled, and then setting the business up, and then, making sure that Eden and Martin are also settling in. Like, there are so many uncomfortable growth moments along the way. And
yeah.
I'd love to, yeah,
Yeah.
just
I think it
hear
was
your thoughts
comfortable
on how
for
you
about
manage.
a year.
Hmm?
Like there was the overriding sensation was discomfort for about a year.
Yeah, which is a long time.
It is. And there's plenty of moments in that where you think, have we done the right thing or not?
Yeah.
So I wonder whether or not uncomfortable growth is not just you made the one big decision. It's how do you choose to go on with, how do you choose to navigate and continue through a series of things which never really feel very comfortable um, until they do, and you don't know when they will.
I think it's
That's hard.
absolutely that.
Mm,
Yeah. It's ongoing. Because big decisions have lots of micro decisions. And like you
yeah,
said, like, it's not ended in a short time period.
no,
And I always think about it as uncomfortable growth stamina. But I'd love to hear just some of the real examples you remember from that time, which is about that extended time frame of having to navigate uncomfortable growth for a really long time.
yeah. Well, I think, when there are lots of examples. So I remember um, having what could have been a very uncomfortable conversation with Martin about the fact that our daughter Eden had only been looked after by family,
Mm.
and that if we were going to move overseas and move her away from that extended family, her two grandmothers and my sister was looking after her a bit, and I was working part time, and so was he. So it was a full kind of,
Mm-hmm.
everyone is looking
Mm-hmm.
after this baby. Um, if we're going to move and we're going to take her out of that set of circumstances, then I don't want to put her straight into full-time daycare in a foreign country.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about becoming the at-home parent in
Yeah.
order to facilitate my ability to take on this challenge with a compromise that I think we collectively as parents feel is important for her well-being? I
Mm.
Granted, I'm very aware that that's an incredibly privileged position to be in because lots of parents do not have the ability to have that conversation.
Yep.
But he could have said no bugger off.
Yeah.
And his
Yeah.
own uncomfortable growth was to say, and he did. He said, I'm very uncomfortable with this idea, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and it took him quite a long time to kind of settle into that effectively, not exactly role reversal, but certainly a new set of like a new country, a new set of circumstances. Being a stay-at-home dad in 2010 in Singapore was not exactly a particularly usual
Yeah.
choice. Turning up to parks um, full of mums and nannies who were
Helpers.
like,
Yeah.
"What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
I'm sure he had plenty of those. I had to realize I had to work through the discomfort of all I had was a laptop.
Mm,
And I had a very short window to try and find some clients that were prepared to pay me,
mm,
which is very challenging when there's not a lot behind you yet, and it's a little bit smoke
mm.
and mirrors. And you know, getting um, the bravery to just knock on some doors of some people that I knew through people, you know, maybe 3 or 4 steps removed, and say, I've done this cool stuff in another country for your brands. Can I just talk to you about that for a time?
Mm.
Or trying to find a house when you have absolutely no idea where you are
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
feel like you're just going round and round and round in circles. You can't, I couldn't, maybe it's just I'm not very good at geography or like reading maps, but I literally had no idea where I was for months.
It's a completely new country. Yeah, I get
Add,
it.
add it's 32 degrees and 99% humidity at every
Yeah.
single moment. And this is going to sound really silly, but I don't mind being vulnerable. I I wanted to look professional because I
Hmm.
didn't have this kind of whole agency behind me to be like and I'll open the door to this amazing group of people who will deliver all the things that I promised. Didn't have any of that. So at the very
Hmm.
least, I wanted to look like I knew what I was talking about. But I was boiling and had massively frizzy hair and
Uh-huh.
couldn't get from, you know, the couldn't get from the train to the office without needing a shower. And I was like, oh, far out. This, how many poor decisions can I have made in one very short period of time? So, you know, there's so many, and some of them are meaningful and some of them are vain, but you know, they all add up
But they
to a
all
sense that
impact
you're
you, and it
sitting in
is,
discomfort
yeah, it
forever.
is part of the emotion, right? Like,
Mm,
because everything is so unknown. Like
mm,
even what suburbs are there to choose from? I don't know the suburbs. It's not the same as when you live in a city and over time you kind of know east or west or north or south and you know the suburbs
yeah,
generally. But when you're moving countries, everything is different.
it
And
is.
it's those little day-to-day things that can be really difficult. Like, I can't even make my hair straight.
Yeah, I mean, I still can't, but you know, I really couldn't in Singapore in that kind of humidity. But I think that also just talks to what gets you to keep going through that. And
Mm,
I was so excited and
mm,
curious about what I was going to learn and,
mm.
and how that might change what I'm capable of and how I viewed myself in the world. It was enough to just go, well, that was a shitty day where I had no one talk to me and I didn't know what I was doing. And I was sitting in a puddle of my own sweat all day whilst attempting to look like a professional. Don't think I achieved any of those things today. However, I did have the most amazing conversation with a Singaporean taxi driver who told me all of this incredible stuff about the dynamics of that country and the politics of that country and the history of that country. And I am looking at something that I would never have otherwise had the chance to look at. And I do live above a Indian Hindu temple, which is covered in incredible colors and statues. And I don't really understand any of this, but mate, is it exciting? Yeah, it is.
Mm,
And is that enough? Yeah, it is.
yeah. And I love that point you made because I also think it's so important when we're going through uncomfortable growth, right? All the things that are uncertain and feel foreign and feel difficult.
Mm,
Um, to focus also on the positives or the things that are exciting, to use your words. It was energizing, it was exciting, it was interesting,
absolutely.
because when both of those sides exist, then it kind of balances it out and it stops you from getting sucked into some of those stresses, which
Yeah.
are natural when things are uncertain.
And look, I mean, I think, and I'm not an expert, but I think those day-to-day stresses and things that feel more like a grind than they do an opportunity exist if you take the big leap or if you don't.
Mm,
I could have stayed where I was and I still would have been in a high stress environment. I still would have had huge expectations placed on me. I still would have had a toddler that didn't sleep until she was 15. I still would have had all those kind of things. I just wouldn't have had the eye-opening, curiosity activating opportunity that came with a huge leap of faith.
I
So
love
you
that.
can sit
That's
in
a
what
great
you're doing, but it doesn't mean that it's easier. The
Yeah.
stresses still exist. They're just going to be
Yeah.
different stresses.
Yeah. And if anything, sometimes they can become more grinding because you're sick of them. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like if I have to do this one damn thing one more time,
Yeah.
they can actually become even more difficult just through the sheer frustration or boredom or whatever it is about it. So I love
Right.
that point. That's a great insight. It's we're born to grow. And if we don't lean into growth, we eventually become stuck or, kind of just down too
Yep.
far into the comfort zone and we
That's it.
become unhappy.
Well, not growing is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So it makes sense that growing is also uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. So better to lean into it than to lean out of it.
I think so. I think so. Better if you can to be uncomfortable with a whole bunch of things that you wouldn't have otherwise experienced than be uncomfortable and not experience a whole bunch of things you wouldn't have otherwise experienced,
Yeah.
in my opinion. And does it
Yeah.
always work? No. And if it's a disaster, you change your mind. It's
Yeah.
okay. You're
Yeah.
allowed.
Exactly. Because nothing succeeds as planned. That's such a, kind of philosophy I have in my head. If you just assume nothing succeeds as planned, then you'll always be optimizing or changing or redoing, but you'll also know what does work for you or
Yeah.
what brought you great excitement or joy and anticipation and that all those wonderful things that come from leaning into growth rather than reminiscing with regret.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. If I hadn't have done it, there's a bunch of things I wouldn't have known that I missed, but the
Mm.
wondering probably would have killed me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I loved how your manager said, this will make you.
Either way,
Either
he
way,
said,
this will
do it or
make you.
don't do it. It'll be the making of you.
Wow. What wisdom.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I mean, we don't want to pump him up too much, but he's a good guy.
Oh, that's awesome. So, we're coming to the end of our time, but what I love to do is also just get some fast thoughts from you
Yeah, for sure.
to leave with people listening to the podcast. So first question, what's something you've learned about yourself that's important in recent years?
So I've taken on some pretty, we talked about it briefly in the setup, but some pretty significant career, like some big jobs, basically. Let's cut to the chase. And one of the things that I have become super comfortable with, but only in the past few years,
Mm.
is that being liked is not as important as being respected
Mm.
in a work sense. So I am kind and I'm very oriented around trying to treat people as individuals and getting to know people properly and having a depth of humanity to the relationships that I invest in. And I invest in all of our people as much as I
Mm.
possibly can, but I don't really need them to be my best friend. I
Mm.
need them to know that I've got their back, that I make decisions that are logical, that I will always explain why we're going to do what we're going to do,
Mhm.
that I value them as people, but I need them to really buy in to the things that we need to do, even if it's not what they wanted to happen. And you can't do that if you're too preoccupied by being everyone's best mate and thinking about whether or not people like you. You
Wow.
need to be much more driven by is this in the collective best interest?
Yeah.
If it is, I'll stand by my decision.
And I love that nuance around still being very humane,
Mm,
respectful and kind, but sometimes you have to have hard conversations and you have to be really clear because we're accountable. And so it's not about being liked, it's about being respected. Um,
absolutely.
but still doing it with humanity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love them, but I don't need them to love me.
Mm. I bet a lot of them do love you
I don't know.
because of that
It's an
clarity.
indulgent conversation to get involved with. Generally, people love me. I don't know, love
Uh,
them.
okay, two more really quick questions. What's really important to you at the moment in your life? And you can pull from any part of your life.
Yeah. So I've just taken on another big job. What's really
Mhm.
important to me is that my opportunities and the difference I can make to the people around me doesn't compromise what the people closest to me need from me.
Mm.
So I want to be there 100% for, I've got a 15-year-old daughter. Now is not the time to not be present.
Mm-hmm.
I have an 11-year-old who's going to start high school next year. Now is not the time for mummy to be so preoccupied by doing big, cool things at work that they don't get my full attention. And so I know that with the number of things I have to do and the number of conversations I need to have and the number of people in all sorts of parts of my life who would like a bit of me, the best way for me to do that is to be fully present and engaged in whatever conversation I'm having whenever I'm having it. So if I'm with my children, I am with my children. If I am with my husband, I am with my husband. He probably gets the short end of this if I'm really brutally honest. If I'm with someone in a work sense and they need my full attention, they get my full attention. It means you can do fewer things, but I think you do them better.
Yeah, I love
and
that.
I do them with more meaning, and the impact you have on people is more significant because you're not rushing around trying to be all things to all people all the time.
Yep, or we're somewhere else in your head because you're trying to fit in 20,000 things rather than saying, okay, I can only do 10 things today, but I'm going to give them my full presence and I'm going to do them well.
Yeah, so that is, I'm not perfect at it because I don't think anybody is, but I'm very aware of it, which I think is half the battle. Right? If you know that you have a tendency to, and I do, I have a tendency to get super wrapped up in work things. I love what I do, so it makes it easy to get super wrapped up in wherever I can be of help or add some value in any one of 1,000 conversations a day.
Yep.
But that's not going to be written on my tombstone, is it? She was really helpful at work to lots of people, lots of the time. Wow, well done you. You know, she has some children that are really decent human beings that understand they are absolutely completely loved. Yeah, okay, I'll take that one as a more important legacy.
Yeah, and that is such a great insight as well, because we all feel pulled in 50,000 directions, and just knowing that, you know, you can't be all things to all people, but how are you going to make it count when you can be?
Yeah, absolutely. Make the biggest difference you can in the moment when you can.
Yeah.
And then don't drag around the whole notion of I should have been more to more people today.
Yeah.
That gets back to the notion of not necessarily having to be liked.
Yeah. Yeah. And not being unrealistic. We're all human and we need to sleep and we need to have balance in our lives so that we can be great at our job, but also a great wife or mother or whatever we are.
All the other things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. Wow. And my last question for you is, what is a current fear, inspiration, or challenge for you at the moment? So you get to choose fear, challenge, or inspiration.
Oh, wow, that's really hard. I should have thought about that question more before you asked it. Not enough foresight. Challenge, fear, or inspiration? I think, and this is going to sound a little bit weird and potentially kind of woo-woo, but bear with for a minute. I think we've all lived through an incredibly difficult period in history. And I don't mean as compared to world wars, and I don't mean as compared to the Great Depression. I mean in our living memory. You know, for people that are kind of your age and my age, it has been a particularly challenging few years for lots of reasons that I don't need to rehash because nobody wants to hear about them ever again, but we know what they are, right? And I think what's happened is that people have come out of that with a little bit of a sense of existential dread, a little bit of a doom hangover. And so what I find both challenging and inspirational is the answer to that, if you ask me, is passion and energy. But we're all a bit tired. And so the challenge of that is, if you, and I do, want to continue to be a force for good in the organisations that I touch, and want to continue to have people who will unlock discretionary effort for me, then it's on me to find that energy and that passion, irrespective of what context I'm operating in. I think that is challenging, but I also think if we get it right, there is an enormous amount of inspiration that can be unlocked just by bucking the trend. And the trend right now is I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I can't believe it's March already. What, all of those things are deficit thinking.
Yeah.
What the thinking below the line, if you
Yeah.
will. Like, what do I lack in this situation, as opposed to forcing yourself? And sometimes it does take you to force yourself to be thinking about what is awesome about this.
Yeah.
What can we, what opportunities does the last 5 years open for us that we can chase down with the kind of enthusiasm that's irresistible?
Yeah.
And if you can get yourself to do that, and nobody can do that all the time, that would be actually impossible and probably detrimental to people's mental health. Pretending to be super enthusiastic all the time is not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's, just energy and passion and enthusiasm are a little bit lacking in the world right now. So if we can find that in ourselves as leaders, then I think it's infectious.
Yeah. I really, that really speaks to me as well, because, when I think about uncomfortable growth, I always talk about everyone has a small self and a best self. They coexist. But our wiring for our small self, which is fear-based, is stronger.
Yes.
And it's when we get stuck in that fear-based with all of those negative things, which happens also from environment, like the challenges of the last few years as well. And we can't counterbalance it by finding the positives, the growth-driven elements that we have in our best self, then we can stay stuck.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's learning how do we identify why and where we are, but how do we figure out how to get to the other side so that we're above the line more often? And I absolutely think that's one of the greatest challenges as well for everyone. And also, like, that's why I'm really passionate about uncomfortable growth, because it's learning how to live more above the line.
Yeah. Imagine if you could live with a sense of joyfulness always.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just to know when you're, kind of getting dragged down, well, what are the things that you can do that you know work for you that will help to bring that passion, help to bring those opportunities, the possibilities, and things that you get excited about, exactly like you talked about with being overseas.
Yep.
Moving to Singapore, and there's exciting things which actually help to balance it all out when you've had a shitty day, when you've been in your pool of sweat and you haven't had any people return your calls and whatever.
Image of all of that, haven't I?
Well, that is absolutely brilliant. So for everyone who's listened to this podcast, if you get a chance to work with Imogen, I think it would genuinely be incredible. I know her people talk so highly about her, and I think you can get
pay them to. Well,
I
mean, I do pay them, but I don't pay them to say nice things about me.
But courage is the thing I've really taken away from what you've spoken about, and ability to stay the course, right? So uncomfortable growth isn't one thing. It's about staying the course when there's lots of pieces that may be linked to one decision, but there's lots of uncomfortable growth to navigate along the way. But there's the real positives that stay there. And if we don't take those opportunities, then actually we can get stuck. And
you know what? Can I be like cheeky and say there is one thing out of all of that I also just want to make sure that we try and land, and that is, if it doesn't work, it didn't work. It's not you that didn't work. Because I think sometimes when we get ourselves into a situation and maybe we do try something and maybe it is a huge leap of faith and it all goes horribly wrong, we just as humans have a tendency to internalize that as there being something wrong with us. And I don't think that's very helpful. And I think, if you can just take that for what it is, which is a lesson on what not to do again, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not you that's wrong. It was that set of circumstances didn't work out.
Exactly.
It's pretty much as simple as that. And I worry for people that, don't do things because they don't want to get it wrong. Getting it wrong is a great lesson too.
Nothing succeeds as planned.
That's correct. Nothing succeeds as planned.
Well, thanks so much, Imogen. And for our listeners, you'll if you have any questions, then there's a link and you'll be able to send the questions to myself, and I can also forward them on to Imogen, so we can continue to keep learning from her. So thanks so much, Imogen.
Oh, thanks for having me. That was great fun.
If you are inspired but thinking, I can't do that, then you are so wrong. Anyone can learn the art of uncomfortable growth with the help of my flagship program, Uncomfortable Growth, Own Your Reinvention. In this, you will learn to navigate your own internal contradictions to finally unlock the courage and commitment to live a deeply meaningful life by design and on your terms. Uncomfortable growth is about the struggle and joy in discovering who you are, what you truly want, and how to make it happen. If this is something you are ready for, then find out more at www.rowenamillward.com. What have you got to lose, or more importantly, gain?